Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I'm doing well.
Good.
Well, and we'll keep solving all the problems of the world.
Yeah, trying to bring some good news.
At least it's good therapy for us.
Yeah.
But if you had to stew in your house and not have any way to let out on this and express yourself, that would be pretty boring. I think I could get depressed over that. You couldn't say a word. And of course, that's what we fear sometimes. Will they ever silence us? But if you rely totally on the internet, that could always happen. So, but the message has to get out, and regardless of the political conditions, I think the message is always there and available. It just need more and more people to help spread the message. I want to start off about what's going on with the mask and what's going on with the lockdowns, and we see a little bit of concessions. You know, people saying, "Hey, maybe we don't have to have lockdown in different positions," and sometimes they switch their position. So I want to start off with reading a quote from the CDC. You know, they're not totally steady on their position, but this quote sounds pretty good, and I thought, boy, I really found something that we can pump up CDC. And it goes, CDC does not currently recommend the use of face masks to help prevent novel coronavirus. Take everyday preventive actions like staying at home when you're sick, washing your hands with soap and water to help slow down the spread of the respiratory illness. But they said nothing about masks. I thought, what's going on here? So then I double-checked my research. February. Who even knew about coronavirus? So they hadn't formulated their political position. That was back when they sort of maybe thought in scientific terms. And so that's the way it all started off. But Redfield has a different position. His current position is, you know, of course, wear masks, do everything, and get hysterical. They're not about to soft pedal this, but others are. Others are rethinking it worldwide. We talked yesterday a little bit about how this became a worldwide epidemic and how it spread and what the causes are of that. But right now, hopefully the concessions will be worldwide too. Oh, there's somebody's brave enough that said, maybe we should be more like Sweden. And now they're making concessions and saying, maybe these masks aren't working. Maybe lockdown isn't the best thing. Maybe it costs a lot of money. Maybe it hasn't helped the kids. So that's what we're finding, yet the diehards are there. And sometimes when you come up and some people start changing their minds, the people who are the true believers or need this and actually have a political position, then they get obsessed with the political position and they demand that they exist there. So they batten down even harder. And I think that's where we are now. More and more people are conceding that there's a more sensible position, one that we, of course, have been presenting, and that things are moving in that direction. So we can expect, a lot of resentment, and there's a lot of threats, and the politicians they'll actually get to the point of threatening political violence against the people who disagree with them, even if it's just expressing an opinion on the internet. You can get branded if you express a medical opinion on the internet and say, well, we don't quite agree with you on hydroxychloroquine. We think it could be. Well, that's not permitted. That's a dangerous thing to do. That's not part of freedom of speech, and that's exciting, anger and frustration and riots and causing. It's a threatening thing. So you have to be punished for that. That kind of stuff can come unless we're able to get more of these people who are conceding, made a mistake, I'm going to ease over. There's no reason why we can't change our minds because the evidence is there, and maybe a few of them might be embarrassed. Well, there were a state or two that acted sensibly. There's been a couple countries that acted sensibly, and the results are better. And and not more people died. Probably a few less people died under a more modest approach, but it certainly had an effect on the economy and a sense of personal liberty.
Yeah, and we were inspired to talk about this. A, we need a good news story. We're getting a little depressed over here. But B, we looked at a few things yesterday in the mainstream media, and we noticed that, slowly but surely we're seeing more headlines that are kind of questioning. Let's put up the first one. This is the first one we saw. This is from Zero Hedge. As Sweden's COVID-19 measures hint at herd immunity, U.S. experts rethink lockdown strategies. And you go through the article. There's some problems in this article, at least, but the headline is helpful. I think the real danger is the danger of dialectics. The action was the lockdowns and the masks and this thing, and the reaction is the realization that they're not working. The synthesis is the danger, and you see some of that in this article and in others, which is that, the truth was probably somewhere in between. We should have managed it better. And this really reminded me a little bit of the Iraq War, when it became obvious there were no weapons of mass destruction. The only destruction was put forth by the neocons. Then you start getting this, no one could have known that this would be this way. And, we were heroes in error. That'll be the last thing they say.
Yeah.
We were heroes in error. This is going to be Fauci's T-shirt that he puts on when he's done. But nevertheless, I don't want to throw cold water on it. And there's a couple more that we'll talk about. But this is a good that the realization, and it's not because all of a sudden they became honest, to be honest. The fact is that they can't ignore it anymore. They've tried to demonize Sweden, demonize South Dakota and all these places, but they just can't shut it up.
In this article, I believe it was this article that quoted Tignell.
Yeah.
And I sort of like it because it's sort of a philosophic statement that, and we've quoted him before. And the whole thing is they make this argument that the mask, one danger is it gives you a false sense of security. Have a mask on, I guess we're okay. And if they were truly infectious, they probably wouldn't do any good for that. And it certainly doesn't do any good when they're not intended, or nobody actually has proven that they do good. But Tignell quotes, he quotes, who the devil was that? Let me read this. The name will come to me in a minute. He said that the belief that masks can solve our problems is, very dangerous.
Yeah,
and of course, that is the big problem that they have, because there's so much fake stuff going on, and Sweden has actually led the charge. And I'm going to get my quote straightened out here in a minute or two, but I don't have it here.
Yeah, it's one size fits all is the main thing that we'll go back to it. But let's go to the next one, because this is also good news. This is one of the top advisors to the British government. He is a Professor Mark Woolhouse. He's a professor of infectious disease epidemiology. Knows a little bit about this stuff. And look what he said. UK lockdown was, quote, a monumental mistake and must not happen again. Here's one quote that I saw in here, Dr. Paul, that I found astonishing. This is the professor, advisor of the UK government. He said, I never want to see national lockdown again. It was always a temporary measure that simply delayed the stage of the epidemic we see now. It was never going to change anything fundamentally. However low we drove the number of cases, and now we know more about the virus and how to track it, we should not be in this position again. He also said, this is interesting, this is a talk about concession. The lockdowns were, quote, a panic measure, but, quote, we couldn't think of anything better to do. It's just amazing. Well, scratching your head, we have no idea. Well, let's just lock it down. The Chinese are doing it, so it must be right.
Yeah, it takes so much for them to learn, but maybe it'll come sometime. But there are others that have sort of admitted that it costs a lot of money, and I think the Wall Street Journal made a comment about how expensive this is, and that it's way out of proportion to the pretense. So the Wall Street Journal has never been radical on this, but at least they're saying, this is not cheap.
Yeah.
This costs money, and there is a problem with it, and we ought to reassess ourselves.
And we actually even have that next clip that we can put up from the Wall Street Journal. And it's just really to point out that the mainstream, of course, they're way behind the curve, because there are a lot of people that we've read that were way ahead of the curve. But here's the Wall Street Journal from yesterday. New thinking on COVID lockdowns. They're overly blunt and costly. Okay, thanks for telling us now. The equivalent of 400 million jobs have been lost worldwide, 13 million in the U.S. alone. Global output is on track to fall 5% this year, far worse than during the financial crisis. So you're right, they're rethinking it from an economic perspective, and of course, the Wall Street Journal, you'd expect that. But I think it's really a good sign that we are seeing more and more concessions. However, and I think we talked about this before the show, that does not mean we let our guard down, because they're only going to dig in deeper when they see this. And that comes to treatment as well, the way they're dealing with treatments as well.
Okay, the one article that I wanted to bring up where I have this really good quote is AIER.
Oh, okay.
And that was save yourself, stop believing in lockdown, which is what we're trying to make the point of. But this article in AIER is Stacy Rudin, R-U-D-I-N.
She's good, yeah.
And the quote is from Voltaire, of course, that I was trying to remember. When society still had time away from the screen to reflect on philosophy, this is what we should be thinking about rather than politics, politics as usual. And the quote goes, "Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities."
Yeah.
Isn't that so characteristic?
Yeah.
The absurdities are out there, and the propaganda and the lying and the scaring, and we've talked so much about that. And I detest the fact that the kids are scared and terrified. And then the whole thing is, the consequence, of course, is the economic destruction that we talk about. And what about the destruction of liberty? So much sacrifice. And I recall so clearly after 9/11 where you were aware of it because you received the phone calls, but I would get calls that would say, "Ron, you have to give up some of your liberties.
Yeah.
Your liberties can't be protected unless you sacrifice some of it," which I have adamantly opposed that issue. So this is an argument. If you can't have liberty if you're dead, you're going to die. And I think it's so tragic because if this doesn't get reversed, can you imagine this whole generation growing up with this intimidation? And the reversal of it is going to be very difficult. So the sooner we remove these shackles that are being placed on a whole generation of people. And what about the people who... what about the average person starting a business, took a risk, is doing well, and there are a lot of ramifications of the imperfect economic system we have, but actually they took this and they're the ones who got wiped out. Because they fell into the trap of listening to the absurdities of government, and then what's the government's result? Oh, we'll print money and we'll send you a check. Yeah, that's going to really help. They don't talk about the basic principle of allowing people to deal with this, and that's what we're dealing with here is, that first quote from CDC had it right. Just wash your hands and take care of yourself. That's what's happened for centuries, and allow natural, conditions to take care of it. And that does not mean you reject good common sense, but it does say that maybe these medical decisions, which are so important, should be made, by the doctor and the patient relationship and by, private companies and whatnot, private hospitals. But this idea that the bureaucrats and the politicians and the money-hogging people who are going to be involved in the drug business, that is where the real problem comes from and just compounds it. But it's the whole principle of who should be making the decision. It's not like every time we disagree with what's happening, it's what we're disagreeing with is the government's doing it, they're doing it wrong, and they don't have the authority, and they will mess it up.
Yeah.
And at the same time, solving the problem is more efficient, and it is much better if you do it in a voluntary manner. It's like saying, oh no, if the government doesn't do it, nobody will. But what happens when you wake up to lockdown? How have they done anything worthwhile? And if they can bail out everybody by just printing money in, you have the consequence of that. You say, well, how can you depend on the government? Well, legalize freedom. That's what I say. That'll solve a lot of the problems.
You read the CDC recommendations for February, and they were about like how they've always been, as we all remember when you have colds. So at first they were sound, like you say, but I think someone remembered at some point the famous words of Rahm Emanuel, never let a good crisis go to waste.
There you go.
Hey, we got to turn this thing on its head. Never, did we say never use a face mask? We meant always use a face mask or else. And now you see, you talk about committing atrocities. I've seen videos in Australia and Spain of police punching people, including women, in the face for not having a mask on. So yes, they are committing atrocities. But the politicization of medicine is something that you've focused on for a while, and it continues. It continues to this day. You know, President Trump the other day said the CDC needs to fast track emergency authority to use the plasma from those that have recovered from the coronavirus. And this is something that as soon as he said it, it reminded us of hydroxychloroquine because the media went nuts. And I'll put up this one picture and then toss it over to you, Dr. Paul. But this is a great example. This is Alex Berenson, I think, tweeted about this today. Before the president endorsed it, here's the Washington Post. Blood plasma from people who recovered is a safe COVID-19 treatment, study says. Blood from people who recover from coronavirus could provide a treatment. As recently as August the 3rd, 4 former FDA commissioners, blood plasma might be the COVID-19 treatment we need. Then Trump says, hey, why don't we try the blood plasma? And then here's yesterday's Washington Post. Scientists express doubts about coronavirus treatment touted as breakthrough by Trump.
Oh my, you never guessed that.
Yeah.
So we have a contest between a bureaucrat who is now a doctor. He used to be a doctor, but now the doctor for the world, and that's Fauci, and he's out there practicing medicine for everybody. And then you have the president practicing medicine. Sometimes he comes down with the right answer, especially, scientifically speaking. But the point I make is they shouldn't be the ones making this decision. It should be done by honest researchers. Matter of fact, from my understanding of plasma use, I think it sounds very reasonable, and it's been tested all, and it just needs more tested under these conditions. But it's not without risk. Sometimes blood transfusions about 20 years ago was bad when HIV was unknown and all. So it has to be done with some good sense, but it doesn't come from bureaucrats and the politicians or drug companies.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing. If the drug company is only in there to see how fast that they can get a drug that is going to be paid for by the government, it's not going to work. So it's back to this whole thing. This may well be a very good idea, and it should be permitted, and it should be the scientists telling you whether the double-blind study was sufficient or not. There was a time when the universities were involved with this rather than just the government making these decisions. But boy, I think one lesson has been learned, and including myself, is the CDC is more ruthless and more powerful than a lot of people ever realized. And all of a sudden you find out that Bill Gates is that powerful person. Yeah, we knew he had a lot of money. And to tell you the truth, years ago, I thought he was in the business of trying to save the lives of some poor people from tuberculosis.
Yeah.
So his image was built. But all of a sudden, right now, from our viewers, it's pretty definite that they're very much aware. It'd be a hard time. That would be my guess of our viewers, that they wouldn't be talking and say, "Hey, you guys, just forget it. Bill Gates is a humanitarian. It's out of the bag." I think people know what he's been up to.
Yeah, and he's funding all these places. He's funding the CDC. He's funding everything. Yeah. And no wonder they all come up with the same result. But, this media hypocrisy is just astonishing. If Trump likes it, it's got to be bad. There's no objective, view or look. He should probably start liking bad things, and then the media would support other things. But I think you had something from our friend Bill Sardi that you were going to bring up as well. Because that is, now that we've kind of finished with some more pleasant news, we'll have to turn to the darker side.
We have one. I can't very well put it up, but there's 2 pages of small print of a piece of legislation that's going through the legislature in New York. Of course, More Practice of Medicine, More Solution. And Bill Sardi, of course, is a friend.
Yeah.
He writes for Lou Rockwell almost daily.
Yeah.
And he's not an MD, but I tell you what, he knows a lot more because he's a journalist.
Good journalist, yeah.
Can you imagine an honest journalist in the midst of all this? So he does do a lot of research, and he knows a lot of medicine and science. But he sent a little note out today talking about this bill that's going through the legislature in New York. And I'll read his statement he made. Attached, please find a New York State Bill 8A99, which is now under consideration. And to take in an individual suspected, they're going to take in, it allows the state to take in suspected of being infected or contaminated to a detention center. That sounds like prison. And there compel him or her to receive any medical treatment deemed necessary, including forced vaccination. And, I think we've been suspicious of this. Our viewers are suspicious of this. And, Robert Kennedy is suspicious of this.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, he has actually expressed again to me that he would enjoy coming back.
Yeah.
And I think we will get him back on this because this forced vaccination, again, back to the thing we repeat over and over again, it doesn't mean that all vaccinations all vaccinations aren't bad.
Yeah.
The thing is who makes the decision? This kind of authority, and of course, everybody should know about New York by now. In New York City, half the people leaving, they're boarding down Fifth Avenue, and people aren't waking up. Maybe they will. Maybe there'll be some surprises where the voting will be to throw out some of the Marxists, but
don't hold your breath.
Hold my breath on that. But anyway, this is a warning. We know there's some conceding that they've been wrong and they're moving in our direction. And the science, I think the science is really on our side. But politically, I'm really convinced I'm on the side of not depending on the kind of people that I got to know in Washington, the bureaucrats, the politicians, the special interests, the lobbyists, and that's just, it turns into criminality is what it is. But they're the ones who are holding more guns than we are, and they'd like to take ours away.
Yeah. Well, there was once upon a time you'd be considered a pretty crazy conspiracy theorist if you said the government was getting ready to round us up and put us in detention centers.
And there it is.
So there you have it. They're not even shy about it. And that's the real danger of the contact tracing, because if they test someone and he just happens to be positive for the virus or whatever they're testing for, because it's pretty unreliable, then everyone he's come into contact, they can grab these people and put them in these detention centers, put this experimental vaccine in them. I mean, this is something out of a dystopian novel. And it's not just New York. Virginia, remember the health director there said, as long as I'm in charge, you're all going to be forced to have a vaccine. Massachusetts is the same way. So you think, okay, New York, they're going to force people to they must have a disease out of control in New York if they're going to lock you away and force you to get vaccinated. The deaths must be pounding up, piling up. But let's look at the daily deaths in New York. This is the reality beyond the hype. Look at this, Dr. Paul. Nobody's dying of COVID in New York. They already killed off all the old people, and there's no one left to die. But these people are not going to let up. Even with no deaths, they're just not going to let up with this power.
Right. Most people think that hopefully, this won't happen, and it'll do it. They talk about using our telephone. They already have follow us, with our telephone.
Yeah.
But it's at the point now where you can't turn off your phone. That is a big problem. Who's going to give up their phone? Everybody's dependent on the phone now. But what about Gates's plan for the digital passport and putting this information in? And what if you can't get a job? What if all these ifs? And the sad part is that we haven't done our job yet. We haven't warned enough people, because I'll bet you if we had to go out there and say, okay, make 2 lines. Here, you can opt out of your vaccine. Here, you get the vaccine in November. You'll be first one out. Who would have the longest line?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, people are lining up for it. But that is so bad that then how do you reverse that? But people are, so careless on sacrificing a little bit of liberty. So I remember the first time I was fighting too much surveillance by the government. Was called the Bank Secrecy Act, way back in the 70s. And I was told, don't worry about that. If you didn't do anything wrong, nobody's going to bother you. So, and that was back then. And just think of the expansion of that. And that was passed, really pushed by Republicans at the time. The Bank Secrecy Act. And it was actually the exact opposite. It was the bank, your Personal Finances Exposure Act to the government. And it's expanded since. So this is the reason, a little bit conceded to the government. They're paying for this. Oh, you're on government medical care. Well, you can't get medical care unless you do what we tell you.
Yeah.
We're going to keep you healthy. You take this, and this. So I don't like this idea of this principle where people fall to the falsehood of saying, well, I'm only going to give up a little bit of my liberty and I'll be okay. That is an open invitation for the government to take over completely.
Yeah, and then like you say, I think at this point, close to 50% would refuse the vaccine, but that's with all else being equal. As you point out, there are a lot of ways they can make things miserable for people. It's like with the masks. Most people hate them. But they say, I'm sure they say it to you too. I don't want conflict. I don't want to wear it in the store, but I don't want anyone to yell. Yeah, we have to understand that. I don't want anyone to yell. Who wants to be yelled at? Nobody does. So that's what they can do with the vaccine, and they can make it even worse. But speaking of the mask, I'm going to go through a couple of real quick things and close. But here's something that came out yesterday in the Washington Examiner. CDC guidelines say wearing a mask during prolonged exposure to coronavirus won't prevent possible infection. You can look at it on the Washington Examiner, and you'll see this is pretty fascinating. They're saying this really, they do nothing to protect you. But here's one I want to just bring up in my closing, because the Sturgis rally, the motorcycle rally in South Dakota, that drove the maskers and the lockdowners nuts because hundreds of thousands of people showed up on their motorcycles, no masks on. They had a great time. They were drinking at the bar. They were chatting, doing all the motorcycle things that people do. And here's the AP coming out today. Look at the headline, revved by Sturgis rally, COVID-19 infections move fast and far. And you read through this article, there is not a single bit of fact that justifies the assertion that they're moving fast and far. I think there were several 100,000 there, and they found 80-some people have had the virus out of that many. So the idea that there is a surge after this is totally bogus. And here's a quote. Here's what, you go down a little bit in the article and you find out what they really want. They don't want to inform you, they want to propagandize you. So they quote this guy, Dr. Howard Koh. Oh, who's he? Oh, he worked at the Department of Health and Human Services under Barack Obama. And here's the problem, he says, we need a nationally coordinated testing and tracing system. He said, we would need a finely orchestrated national system, and we're far from that. What we are really witnessing is a 50-state effort with all of them going in different directions. Yeah, and some of them are going the right direction, like South Dakota, Dr. Paul, and that's what they can't stand. They're still fighting for a one-size-fits-all.
That's for sure. When people are confronted with a problem, whether it's physical problem, political problems, or whatever, people have choices on what to do. And the old saying about there's some who choose fighting and others choose flight, fight or flight. Those are real choices, especially when it comes to physical things. And I have to admit that I am not one that likes to go out and have the fight. I admire the people that know what they're talking about. They go out and they challenge it. They're civil disobedience, and they challenge it and they make a good headway. I really admire that because it's not my nature to want to do that. I didn't use that technique in Congress because I was a little bit more pragmatic about saying, well, I'm one person. I'm not, if I yell and scream for 5 minutes, am I going to change anybody's opinion? Probably not. So I was sort of one that would not exactly flight, but reassess my position. And that's what I do now. I don't like to go and get to a store or something, and I don't want the confrontation. I'll get around it somehow. But what I do is I believe that I'm more motivated to get in my little corner or have an access to passing or you spreading a message. I want to inform people. Information is a way of attacking it, and it fits my nature to do that. That's what I hope I can do, and will continue to do my best in doing that. Inform people of what their rights are and get them energized and get them to believe that liberty is so much better choice than the bureaucracy and the authoritarianism and depending on the government. But I think the information is so important that we have to do that. But I do admire people who, in a practical sense, will challenge and get some of the authoritarians to actually back down, and say, where's your law? Where's the book? Where does it say this? And I think that's very, very good. So there's all ways of fighting this. The one thing that I strongly advise is don't concede. Don't concede the principles of liberty by piecemeal. And we like the concessions that they're making when they made a mistake and they're coming our way. That concession, I think is a good concession. But I think it should challenge us all to think up our best ways to spread a message. And believe me, I get impressed every day by meeting more and more people who have been working in this. And a lot of them are very young, and they have their small programs and their small audiences, and they're building, and some have made tremendous progress since they got interested in politics since 2008. And I really, really am impressed by that. So everybody has a challenge and a job to do, especially if you have a conclusion. I think we're really on the right track. Freedom is better than slavery, and you have to sort of, show them why it's beneficial, and you have to change people's minds and challenge the philosophy of Marxism and socialism and authoritarianism and inflationism and all these things. They have to be challenged because ultimately, as things go along and things are failing, people are making concessions now because they're recognizing it doesn't work. So there is some truth to some of these people who really say, hey, how long can I stand up for this? This isn't really working. So the concession really comes. So I think there's a role for all of us to play to make sure that people know what they're doing, and there's no reason in the world that we have to concede to them any ounce of liberty. We should stand up for the cause of liberty, and I believe we can solve our problems in a much better fashion than we're doing today. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.